Right, I think we're going to get started here. And today's webinar is on business ownership and how to use business ownership as a way to secure wealth, legacy, and peace of mind for the business owner, the employees within the company, and the community at large. As we go through today's webinar, we are going to use a few polls to get to know each other. And these polls will all be confidential in nature, so feel free to pick the answer that is the best fit for you. We also will be taking questions through the chat window. And if you have a question that you would like to ask, please put it into the chat window, send it over to Robin, and she will then at the end of the webinar, we'll go to all of the questions and try and get them all answered. I expect that we'll be on the webinar for about 50 minutes. I just got a nice chat from an old friend. So good to see you, Scott, and glad to have you here. Welcome today, and welcome to everyone else who's joining us. Let's put the first poll question up, Robin, and we can let people weigh in on the best fit for them. And this is just a demographic question. How many people in our audience are business owners, employees of privately held businesses, advisors to privately held businesses? And if none of those are a fit, then go ahead and use the other box. And as you fill out this poll question, if it is in your way, I believe you can move it out of your way, just shove it around on the screen and get it out of your way so you don't have to look at it. And while we're letting people take their time to gather and answer this question, let's go and on to the next slide and tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do here at Strategy Leaders and why we do it. The concept for this company was based on research that I did at Columbia University, working with an American economist and business historian, Professor Stuart Burchett, and he was looking at the question of how to build a successful 21st century US economy, and one that could compete on the world stage and transition away from our reliance to the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 publicly held companies that were already moving offshore to Asia and Africa and were expected to do more of that movement, which meant that their goals weren't necessarily going to be completely aligned with the owners or with the US economy. Our company has been around since 1995. We built a template early on to help business owners achieve their goals for growth, profit, stability, predictability, and basically get the monkey off the owner's back in the process. And we've been using this model for 25 years, and we like to say that we are building the 21st century US-centric economy, one successful business at a time. Robin, do we have enough answers? You want to bring up the answers to the poll questions and I can share a little bit with the audience? So it actually seems to be pretty evenly split between business owners, employees, advisors, and then people who put themselves into the other bucket. So welcome all of you, and I hope that you get what you're looking for in this webinar. We are going to go through a lot of material quickly, so if you do have questions and you want to dig into more information, we're also happy to get on a call with you or take an email from you after the webinar. And we also do have a chat box on our website, so you can also go to that. Let's take a look at the table of contents. We're going to look at the stages of business development, so just a little bit of grounding information along with why small to mid-sized businesses matter. I think it's always important to just get ourselves grounded. Then we're going to look quickly at why, what are some of the top reasons why SMBs consistently underperform. So let me clarify, SMB means small to mid-sized businesses, typically defined as companies with under 30 to 50 million in revenue, all the way down to a few $100,000, and with a handful of employees on up to several hundred. The majority of the presentation today is going to be focused on solutions and preventative measures, things that you can do to deal with areas of concern in the business. And we will then wrap up by looking at consulting as a tool for growth and development. So helping you figure out when you might want to use consulting and where to look or why to look. In addition to covering today's content, we do have 3 additional upcoming webinars: valuing the asset, planning for exit or transition, and growth by acquisition. And I will cover those more later on in the presentation. So with that, let's get started. In our original research at Columbia, I looked at the 5 stages of business growth, which are defined here as 5 stages. Stages 1 and 2 are privately held, owner-operated businesses. Stage 3, 4, and 5 is where companies have gone to the public markets. They've raised capital, then they've built out their expansion of the business, both in terms of human capital and infrastructure. And then finally, in stage 5, they've gotten to the point where they have become big enough and cumbersome enough that they've had to break themselves down into more nimble operating units. So what Bruchet was talking about, and I found extremely compelling, that while I had worked in both public companies and in family-owned businesses, Bruchet believes strongly that we had maxed out the value that we were going to get from those publicly held companies. And we were going to have to focus on these stage 1, stage 2 companies that are privately held, grounded in the communities. All companies in our economy start in stage 1. They're privately owned, they're entrepreneurial, informal. And quite honestly, this bar is so high because so many of these companies never get out of stage 1, no matter how many years they're in business or how many generations they go through. And that despite the fact that in stage 2, privately owned business builders that are running the business for deliberate growth, profit, stability, and predictability have much greater rewards. What we found is there were real challenges for making it over the fence from stage 1 to stage 2. And so a lot of what we're talking about today are actually the tools to get from stage 1 to stage 2, and as a result, improve the consistent performance of the company. Our goal is to help companies make it over that fence to stage 2, because by doing that, we also increase the ability of those companies to contribute to the economy because they last longer, they make more while they're in business, and they exit more profitably when they're ready to do so. So with that as background, one other thing I do like to talk about is just why we think like business owners and entrepreneurs here in this country. Privately held businesses are part of our US DNA. We started in this company with the Dutch East India Company prying the fingers of the kings and nobles off of control on trade and wealth. As a result, we created a more equitable society of opportunity with a rich middle class. And today we have millions of enterprising men and women taking risks in all walks of life to build their passion. And this is the American dream called business ownership. It is who we are as a country to a large extent. There are certainly a lot of facts about why SMBs matter to us as a business. Here you see some of the compelling stats. It's worth noting that in the 2001 recession and then the 2008 to 15 recession, we paid a severe price for ignoring the SMB market in favor of supporting big banks and big businesses. So if you'll remember the TARP program, a lot of money went to saving the banks, saving a couple of insurance companies and a couple of automakers. And as a result, small to mid-sized businesses were left to languish on the sidelines, even though they represent 98%, 95 to 98% of all companies in this country and employ over half the workforce. The price we paid was substantial, namely low wages, high unemployment, loss of income producing companies that had to be rebuilt or created by other entrants who wanted to come in. And that resulted in an extended recession that lasted from 2008 on, nearly 10 years, and that some people will still choose to call a near depression. Today, we're doing something very different. As a result of addressing COVID, we are in fact focusing the rescue resources primarily on Main Street, which is code word for SMBs, small to mid-sized businesses, making sure that the companies that contribute greatly to our economy stay in business, their workers stay employed, and the companies have the resources that they need to continue to grow. Something else that I really like to have people think about is to consider the small to mid-sized business contribution to our communities. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's start with social responsibility. In public companies, a CEO compensation has risen almost 1,000% since the late 1970s, and worker compensation at the same time rose about 12%. Publicly held companies, CEOs get paid nearly 400 times what the average worker gets, which means rising inequality, or as we talk about a lot of times, that 1%er versus everybody else. And that doesn't happen necessarily in privately held companies, where owners recognize the need to pay fair wages, to reinvest in their businesses, to keep them healthy, and to make sure that they continue to keep and develop the workers that they have so that they can continue to grow their businesses. Right now, let's take a look at some of the challenges that small to mid-sized businesses deal with. Robin, if you want to bring up the next poll question, I'll move on to the next slide in a second, but you can start to weigh in here with how many of these challenges your businesses face. You can check as many of them as you want. And as you look at this list, let me just make the point that in terms of our privately held businesses, we have an operating model where the owners and management are directly engaged with the employees and directly engaged in the community. So they're volunteering, they're helping social organizations to work in their local communities, they're encouraging their employees to participate in the local communities, and they're contributing assets to the local communities in terms of profit and resources, and making sure that businesses actually exist on Main Street. The other contributions that these businesses make that are really important is while they employ 50% of our workforce, they actually are the source of employment for most of the first and last jobs that our workers and our workforce get. And they are drivers of innovation. And what I mean by that is most of the innovation in our economy comes from small businesses, a business owner who has a passion, works on developing it, and then later on it gets snapped up by a big guy. But the large corporations are not necessarily driving the innovation at the rate and volume that the small businesses are. So let's take a look at the next slide and take a look at your answers to this poll question. So Robin, if you want to bring up the results to the poll question, and I'll talk people through it a little bit. So the big winner here was lack of structure. That was the biggest concern, followed closely by lack of plans, lack of an exit strategy, not understanding success metrics. And I have to tell you, every box got checked by one or more people here. So we're going to work our way through these issues and take them one by one. And whoops, hold on one second, guys. Take them one by one. Hang on. And give you each a chance to come down through them and think about things that you can do in your business. So in terms of solutions and preventative measures, this is the kind of stuff that we work on with our clients all day long, every day. we're going to hit the highlights. We're going to move through this quickly. If you have questions, please come back to us and ask for more information on things that you might want to do to apply solutions to your business. And let's start with the issue of planning and focus. So many business owners tell me their plans are in their heads, or they're on slips of paper on their desks. And quite honestly, folks, that makes it hard for others to contribute and follow along. And here are some practical how-to solutions that you can try to make sure that you do have long-term plans and that you marry that up with a short-term tactical plan, but don't lose sight and shift to a short-term focus. You want to make sure that you are pushing the planning process down, all the way down through the organization with goals at every level, figuring out wins for every participant. It's really important to remember people like to win. They like to know that they have the opportunity to succeed. And while we don't want to just be handing out a trophy to everyone just for showing up, we can create opportunities for individuals to make progress and to be rewarded or recognized for that. I like to say that it's all about thinking long-term and defining the long-term, and then learning how to act and measure, which is the results with KPIs on a short-term basis, where you're making readjustments regularly. And to sum it up, it's all about document, document, document. Robin, why don't you bring up the next poll question, because this is going to go to part of the next issue that we're going to be talking about, which is the question of how do people assemble an asset portfolio? How do they build reserves? How do they make sure they have adequate funding and deal with the right bank? So I'm going to ask you all to weigh in on how financially secure is your business. Extremely, not secure, unsure, have reserves but still worried about security. Try and pick the best answer for you and your business. And we'll talk our way through a few of these solutions as you're answering that. You want to make sure that you do assemble an asset portfolio. And by this, I mean, probably more than one business. Get one business up and running, get it going well, and then look for the next business. And complement your real estate or home portfolio with business real estate as well. That's another way of building an asset portfolio. Make sure that you are building up to 12 months of overhead and get that in place. It may seem daunting to think about getting to 12 months of reserves, but I can tell you that almost all of our clients do get there. And when they get there, it allows them to sleep soundly at night. Things go wrong and they have the reserves to either get funding or to be able to pay to build the solutions that they need to overcome the challenges coming their way. You do want to make sure that you understand banking ratios and align yourself with the right bank for your business. If you don't know how to do that, we can certainly talk you through it and help you evaluate where you are and what else you need to be doing. And the last thing about building up reserves and paying down debt concurrently, this is something that I do see a lot of business owners making a big mistake on. Most business owners come to us, they do have debts when they come to us, and as they deal with that debt portfolio, they want to pay that down first before they start building reserves. That actually doesn't work as well as putting $1 to debt and $1 to reserves. So let's just look at the answers on this poll question. And it looks like most of you either feel pretty good about being financially secure, or you do have some concerns about the security of the business, but you are working on reserves. And I want to applaud that. I do think there's a lot of opportunity coming through the COVID programs that are out there to build up the reserves for the business. And I encourage every business owner to take advantage of as many programs as they can, but also be aware that most of those programs are now starting to wind down. So you can take that poll question down, and let's take a look at another poll question about employees. So how many of you are worried about losing employees and filling in positions or knowledge gaps? when it's a pretty common issue and one taking on greater importance as businesses ramp back up after COVID-19. And because of that, most privately held businesses without the right structure and the right employees, the business ends up sitting squarely on the owner's shoulders. And that burden then can get heavier and heavier as the business expands and the years go by. So how many of you are worried about losing employees, which is the first issue? And we're going to talk about that a little bit more further on in this presentation. Let's see what kind of answers we've got. If you can give me the answers. So it runs the gamut. The biggest is mildly worried, and then a chunk of you are extremely worried and some not so worried at all. Take a look at these suggestions about building teams, learning to delegate, managing through reporting, defining departments and individual responsibilities, cleaning up lines of conflict, and then this last one, take vacations to test the structure. So let's throw up the next poll question here, Dahlia, or I'm sorry, Robin. Yeah, because I want to know how you guys are all doing at taking vacations. Most business owners tell me they're lucky if they can get off for 2 weeks in a row, and there's no way that multiple owners can get off at the same time. I got to tell you, our clients are taking 2, 3, 4 or more weeks at a time. We actually have one client who regularly takes off 6 months at a time and uses that time to recharge and also come up with new ideas for the business. You want to bring up the answers on this one? Do we have the answers yet if it's filled in? Vacations are a tool that you want to use to step away from the business and give people an opportunity to perform without you in the way. And as you give them an opportunity to perform, you then come back in, see what worked, see what didn't work, work on fixing the problems, and then step away again for the next vacation. And it looks like most of you are getting 2 weeks. That's actually a pretty good answer to start. But if you're getting 2 weeks, now you want to start talking about, okay, how do I take 3 weeks? And then how do I take 4 weeks? All right, let's go to the next slide. So the next issue is all about running out of knowledge and stalling. And it's a biggie because it can be so hard to see. Symptoms can include that the company bounces around in the same bandwidth for several years, up a little, down a little, finding it hard to continue consistently growing revenue and profits without giving it back. And there are things that you can do about it. Here are some great suggestions. Use your planning process to both identify and then close gaps. So where the plans are not panning out, those are the gaps. And then what you want to do is document how you're going to close those skill gaps. You also want to allow employees to train on company time. Employees will be more likely to engage in the learning process if you're letting them use company time. You want to cross-train throughout the organization so that there are multiple people who can do everything in the company. Encourage and reward your employees for skill building and also build that into individual reviews. And then the bottom two are all about building future lists of who you're going to recruit in the future, that somebody that might have more knowledge than what your company has today and in one or more areas, and then also building a list of qualified vendors for the future. I think a lot of times this is where business owners thinking short term can get stuck. When they run into a problem, they'll start quickly looking for a person or looking for a vendor, as opposed to having been thinking for a couple of years about who they might want next in the business and really being prepared for that transition. Let's go to the next slide. And this one's all about lack of succession and replacement plans. We're hearing a lot about employees who leave jobs, not just because of money, but because they want a better or different work environment. This is really taking off in the news as we come out of COVID. And a lot of business owners do tell me that if they lose one or more key players, they're really screwed. There are ways to show key players your level of commitment and to get them to think twice about heading out the door. And here are some ways to go about building a solid workforce that will stick with you. First of all, build from the bottom up. So people grow with the company and they affiliate with the company as they grow. They see their success tied to the success of the company. They're part of the fabric of the business. Make sure that you're watching the culture that you're building, and that is community, respect, collaboration are three biggies right there. Make sure that you are identifying any individuals or positions that are hard to fill and addressing those as priorities, documenting knowledge about how those jobs are done, and then ultimately how every job in the company is done. In terms of hanging on to people, you can think about things like golden handcuffs, ESOPs, stock distribution, and certainly use vesting as a retention tool. So rather than just issuing a big bonus check and then the employee cashes the check and leaves and moves on, think about issuing some of those rewards over a longer period of time where the individual has to think twice about what they give up in order to move on. As we come out of COVID, a lot of us are working more and more remotely, so make sure that you do find ways to bring people together. You want to make sure that people do have opportunities to bond and share with each other. Offer employees opportunities to move up, both in terms of responsibility and income. And then as you do that, make sure that you tell your employees that it is their responsibility to identify and train their successors. Exit strategy, generational transfer programming, something that happens or doesn't happen in a lot of businesses. And what happens when the current owner exits the business? In something like 40% of the cases, absolutely nothing. The business folds up or gets picked off. The owner never realizes the value that they should have for the business. And in my opinion, that's a terrible shame. Owners spend a big chunk of their lives building something of value, and they ought to get paid well for it when it's time to retire. This page is all about suggestions to think about how to fix that problem. So build and train successors inside the business. Make sure that you fill the organizational structure gaps so that people there are capable of running the business. If you're talking about family members, make sure that they have to go and prove themselves somewhere else. I like to say, let some other business owner beat them up first, and then let them come back and prove that they can perform and show you what they can do and prove that they want to be here in this business. It's worth noting that something like 75% of children or the next generation will say that they would rather get the money than the business. So if you are looking at family members as part of your succession planning, make sure that that's something they actually want to be a part of. Train your management team so they can run the company as you build 5 and 10-year plans for your own exit. Lots of business owners tell me that they don't have the management team of the future. And in fact, that's one of the big reasons that they do come to work for us, to get that team in place and up to speed. And in this case, you want to look at, as an owner, your role. Break your job up and cross-train people to do portions of your job. Make sure that you're running based on rules, goals, reporting, accountability, delegate responsibility, build leads in every function. So people who can do the functions and teach others about the functions, hold your managers accountable for making decisions. You personally need to move out of the center of the office and out of being centric to specific roles. It's important to be honest about the time that you will or will not be available in the business, and lessen your involvement over time. And I like to say, as to a business owner, get out of the way, let the people around you learn how to lead. Next challenge, people don't understand success metrics. This was actually one of the items that you folks commented on as a big issue. And if you want to know how things are working, whether you're at work or away on vacation, and for everyone else in the organization, everybody needs to know how the company is doing in all areas. And you want to make it clear where you want to go, what's expected to get there, and then figure out metrics to track the progress. The metrics, then once you have the metrics, you set up reports to track results over time to see if things are improving or declining. A lot of business owners will say to me, but what metric do I start with? And I'll say, hey, if you don't know, just take a wild ass guess. Put a number down on paper. Once you have the number down on paper, you'll start measuring it and you'll get a lot clearer as to how you are doing. Another thing that I will say is that if you ask the people on the front line what they should be measured on, very often they will have suggestions. And a lot of times you can roll that up and then keep adding it up and get to the top of the organization. But what you're doing with KPIs is you're using facts to overcome assumptions about how things are working. Be specific about the growth, gross profit, and net margin goals that you have. A lot of business owners don't like to share numbers specifically, especially for gross profit and net profit. That's okay. Use percentages. So we're looking to achieve a net profit of 20%, and then teach your employees how that gets used. So that goes to taxes, it goes to building reserves, it goes to paying down debt, it goes to investing in the future. And lastly, a very small portion of that should go to the shareholders or the owners of the business. Your employees probably are making assumptions about how much you're making, and in my experience, they actually are assuming you're making a lot more than you are. So I don't think you have a lot to lose by starting to publish some of these metrics. Owner not demanding enough. Entrepreneurs are wired to pitch in and make things happen. That's part of what makes them successful as entrepreneurs. But I find that they don't ask often enough if the business is meeting their needs. And as a group, I like to say that owners are great at suffering. And when they do demand that things change, they often don't get the results they want because they don't quite know how to go about implementing and executing change in the business. So here are some suggestions that I would suggest you try. And Robin, why don't you bring up the next poll question? We'll take a look at that. How well do your employees do at helping you with the business? We want to look at, in terms of being demanding as a business owner, a minimum growth rate of 10% year over year. If you don't set that growth rate metric, my guess is that the employees under you are not necessarily going to go out on a line and say, hey, we ought to do this year after year and put a stake in the ground. They're looking for that leadership from you. Now, a lot of business owners will tell me there's no way they can do 10% growth year over year. And quite honestly, it is a big number. A lot of the Fortune 1000 doesn't hit that number, but it is possible if you are deliberate. Some of it will come to you organically. Some of it comes from what I call stealing other people's picnic baskets. So it may come from acquisition strategy. There are a lot of ways to get that 10% growth rate, but you need the 10% growth rate in order to consistently stay ahead of inflation. Do encourage your people to make mistakes. Drucker says if you're not making mistakes 15% of the time, you're not trying hard enough, but make it clear to your employees that you expect that they will not repeat mistakes. So they'll learn from their mistakes. They'll close the gaps. They'll get better at what they're doing. Go through your list of customers and evaluate them as good or bad. The ones that are bad, either build plans to replace them or turn them into good customers. And sometimes it takes having a frank conversation with a customer about, we're not sure we're going to be able to serve you in the future. Set standards for excellence internally and externally. So Robin, if you could bring up the results for this poll question. And it looks like we're getting kind of a mixed response on this one. You want to make sure that you are helping people get off the bus if they aren't a fit, and at the same time get training and mentoring in place to help people who are going to stay on the bus. Last one that we're going to take a look at is if you want everyone to rally around you, make it clear to everyone where you're going, why, and how. I've had business owners describe running a business as taking off in a plane without a flight plan or a map of landing sites. And that's risky at best and possibly disastrous, and yet it's really common. Something like 90% of business owners say every business should have a business plan, but when asked if they do, 3 out of 4 say they don't. When asked why, they say they're busy, they're not sure what should go into the planning process, they don't know who should be involved in helping them plan. So here are some suggestions. Do use the opportunity to document where you're going as a group opportunity, get people involved, make sure that your customers understand and support your goals, define your contingency plan. So if things go wrong, what do we do? Train and reward people for being nimble and flexible and contributing to making changes when the plans aren't panning out. Make time as an organization for monthly, quarterly, and annually long-term planning. And then as your job as owner, number one job is to accept primary responsibility for driving the company's success by making sure that you are charting a clear path. So with that, let's just wrap up here. Is there a better way? I can promise you that there are real financial rewards for changing your approach and becoming a stage 2 business owner. Instead of having profits flatline near zero year after year, profits grow as fast as revenue. And that's because the waste and inefficiencies of the business are converted into profits. If you're curious and want to learn more, let's have a conversation or come back for our next webinars. So we do have 3 webinars coming up between now and January. The first one is coming up on November 17th, a webinar figuring out the value of the business. For most business owners, their business is either the first or second most valuable asset in their portfolio, their house being the other one. But most business owners don't regularly evaluate how they're doing at building value in the business. And this webinar will teach you how to go about that. And these are a few of the highlights of the topics that we'll cover. In December, we'll wrap up the year with a webinar on planning for exit, how do savvy business owners get ready to exit on their terms, and how can you shift the odds in your favor to meet your specific needs and timetable. This one is no joke. There could be millions of dollars tied to doing this right or not. And it can't be left for the last minute. It takes years to do it right. Although if you are running out of time, we'll have some tips on how to play catch up and salvage as much of the situation as you can. Then finally, we'll kick off January, the new year, and talking about how to grow your business by making acquisitions. Growing any business organically can be really tough. You want to consider your options for jump-starting growth with an acquisition. Some of our clients find this is so successful, they build it into their plans year after year, but acquisitions don't happen by chance. In this webinar, we'll talk about what to look for, why, and how to do everything possible to ensure that it works out well for you. And lastly, let's wrap up with a quick look at how to tell if it's time for you to consider getting some outside perspective to help grow and develop your business. If you're seeing some of these warning flags, it's probably time to start looking around for resources to help. Do your homework by looking for firms that specialize in addressing the kinds of issues facing your business and get to know who you're talking to. Take your time. Ask about how who the people that you're talking to, how they do at forecasting and achieving ROI for their clients and proving out their results. Check references and ask to see a written plan of attack, how they would go about helping before you get started. For those of you who may have questions about specifics on what we work on at Strategy Leaders, here's some examples of things we work on with our clients: brainstorming game plans, figuring out where the value is and isn't, assessing on needs, bringing in people, tools, and systems, training, coaching, educating, building accountability, preparing the next generation so that the company does survive, assisting ownership opportunities and transitions, building thriving companies run by confident owners and managers, and ultimately creating wealth for our clients. This is something that we are so focused on with every client. Specifically, the areas we work on focus on 7 key success factors: business plans that drive growth and profit, preparing for the next generation of ownership, advising buyers and sellers on how to get through a transition, determining value and setting KPIs, building management teams that can support the owner, working through the challenges unique to family-owned businesses. If you want more information, we would love to talk to you. We talk to thousands of business owners every year. It's part of who we are and what we like doing. And at this point, I would like to thank you all for attending and for your interest in building successful privately held businesses.